So recently I did a 10-week training block for the Reading Half Marathon, and this was a big deal for two reasons. One, I hadn't run a half marathon in over 2 years, and two, this was my hometown half marathon and I'd never run it before. So I took this shit seriously. I went full Rocky Balboa, signed up to an online coaching platform, started stretching daily, started going to bed earlier, and drastically improved my diet. I did everything required to get into shape so that I could get a PB. My previous PB was 1 hour, 29 minutes and 40 seconds, and I was in nowhere near that level of shape. But I still set a quite lofty goal of 1 hour and 25, but very quickly realized in the second week of the program that I was just not going to get anywhere near that. So I adjusted my goal to 1 hour and 27, which, by the way, is one of the best things you can do as an athlete. Actually adjust your goals as you go along to be more realistic. Anyway, even getting to 1 hour and 27 was actually going to be quite a tall order, but I managed to follow the program, managed to do every run. Some went good, some went bad, some went okay, but I was in good shape. And 2 weeks before the half marathon, I ran a 10k PB the day after a 12-mile long run, so I felt pretty good. But come race day, I realised I'd failed to do something so key in my preparation that almost meant the wheels came off. I failed to do a pre-mortem. A what? Well, you've probably heard of a post-mortem where a coroner opens up a dead body to run a load of tests and make observations to determine why someone died. And so this idea has been applied in managing projects in almost any field, where in a debrief after a failed project, those involved will sit down, hash it out, and find out what caused the ship to sink. But the problem is this is reactive and waits for the failure to have already happened. So a pre-mortem is the opposite, it's proactive, and what it involves is anticipating and thinking through anything and everything that could lead to the failure of a project. And this then means you can make plans or take actions to successfully avoid those should they end up occurring. Now in sport, we often think of all those things that I mentioned earlier, like your training, nutrition and recovery, and we think that this will see us through and that it's preventative enough to minimise failure, but it's not, and I found out the hard way. So come race day at Reading Half, I set off and I'm cruising. I have to slow myself down to combat the adrenaline and still end up running around 10 to 15 seconds faster than necessary for the first couple of miles. I slow down a bit for the next few miles and ease into my actual race pace, and everything's going as smooth as butter. But then between miles 6 and 7 is when a stick got put between my spokes. This part of the race is where you enter Reading town centre, where there's the most people, where you're running through quite narrow streets surrounded by taller buildings. So what happens is the GPS on my watch starts freaking out. So 1 second it's saying 6 minutes 40 per mile, which was my goal pace, and then I look literally 10 seconds later and it says 8 minutes per mile. I ended up panicking a little bit and ended up speeding up a bit, and I got to the 7th mile marker and my watch didn't beep for the mile. Instead, it said I still had about 0.13 of a mile left. Now for me, I'm still quite an inexperienced racer, so I'm not very good at running off feel. I really do rely on my watch. And so for the next couple of miles, I ended up probably going way too fast, even though my watch kept telling me that I was going slower than I actually was. And this then meant that the last third of the race was just absolutely gross. But it wasn't only the GPS going haywire that threatened to ruin my race. I was also wearing a club jersey that I've only worn a couple of times for shorter races, and for those it was fine. But around mile 10, I felt a little sting on my left nipple. That's right, nipple chafing entered the chat. And I've never experienced this before, and I've always naively disregarded people who use nipple tape. So for a mile or so, I just had to get used to the fact that I was going to be finishing this race with a slightly bloody nip. And to add icing to the cake, my beloved Brooks Christmas racing running socks let me down. Usually, these are my go-to pair, they're so comfortable. But I learned around mile 11 that they're too thin for racing 13 miles. Look at the pain on my face here around mile 12. That's a triple threat of the GPS causing an early blowout, a nipple that at the time felt like it was being tweaked by the devil's hands, and a blister like running on coals. Anyway, I sucked it up and I found a kick for the last 200 meters or so and got through the line at 1 hour, 27 minutes and 51 seconds. So look, I was lucky that these three things didn't end up ruining my goal, but they came very close to doing so. But they were all avoidable. All I needed to do was a few weeks before the race, sit down with a pen and paper and carry out one of these pre-mortems, where I would have just anticipated all of these things that could have potentially gone wrong. And essentially what that just allows you to do is put in an alternative plan of attack, take different actions, or at least just know how to anticipate these things as and when they do actually happen. If I did this, I would have remembered that GPS goes haywire during big events, that nobody's nips are safe, and that too thin socks are going to lead to blisters. And instead I would have used the manual lap function on my watch. I would have taped up those nips real good, and worn slightly thicker socks. And who knows, those things would have probably actually tipped me over into 126 and actually going above my goal. Anyway, shout out Reading for an amazing event. The medal is something else. This thing is just thick, it's quality. Best medal I've ever got. Really will cherish this. And if you've got a big performance coming up in any sport whatsoever, do take the time to do a pre-mortem. It will save you a lot of hassle and will just eliminate anything that could potentially stop you from putting in that peak performance. So good luck to you, and I'll see you in the next video.